4.03%. That is the annual home appreciation rate, where buying a $600,000 house barely beats the S&P 500 over 15 years under the assumptions we are about to use. At 4%, the house loses by roughly $4,000. At 5%, it wins by more than $150,000. That narrow line matters because neither side wins through headline return alone. The house combines leverage, principal paydown, and the value of shelter. The portfolio combines the down payment you did not spend, the ownership costs you avoided, liquidity, and compounding. Change the mortgage rate, comparable rent, maintenance bill, or holding period, and 4.03% stops being your number. So both paths get the same $600,000 house, the same 15 years, and the same available cash. The buyer puts down 20%, or $120,000, and pays $12,000 in purchase costs. The renter invests that entire $132,000 instead. The buyer takes a $480,000 30-year mortgage at 6.5%. Principal and interest come to about $3,034 a month. Add $550 for property tax, $250 for insurance, and $500 for maintenance. The initial ownership cost is $4,334 a month. Comparable rent starts at $3,200. That makes renting cheaper by about $1,134 in the opening month. Rent, property tax, insurance, and maintenance rise at 3% a year. The fixed mortgage payment does not. Every dollar the renter avoids spending gets invested in the S&P 500. I am using an 8% nominal total return, including reinvested dividends. That is an assumption, not a forecast, and it is deliberately below the historical figure people often use when selling the stock side of this argument. The house gets the same treatment. Appreciation is compounded annually, the mortgage balance is deducted, and 6% of the eventual sale price disappears through selling friction. That 6% is not supposed to be a universal commission. It is one allowance for agent compensation, preparation, transfer expenses, concessions, and the general cost of turning an address back into cash. At 3% appreciation, the house grows from $600,000 to about $935,000. That sounds excellent until the sale cost and remaining mortgage arrive. After selling and paying off approximately $348,000 of debt, the homeowner finishes with about $530,000. The renter's portfolio reaches roughly $672,000. About $419,000 comes from compounding the original $132,000. The rest comes from investing the monthly cost difference. 3% appreciation leaves the house path behind by around $141,000. At 4% appreciation, the house is worth roughly $1,081,000 before selling. Net equity after the sale and mortgage is about $667,000. The portfolio still has around $672,000. The stock path wins, although now the difference is small enough to disappear into one roof replacement or a slightly better sale price. At 5% appreciation, net home equity rises to about $824,000. The portfolio remains around $672,000 because the housing cost assumptions have not changed. The house wins by approximately $152,000. The crossover is 4.03%. That is not a national forecast, a buying rule, or a claim that your kitchen needs to appreciate by 4.03%. It is the answer produced by one transparent set of inputs. Its value is that you can see exactly what must happen for the winner to change. A common objection appears immediately. How can an asset appreciating at a little over 4% compete with a portfolio returning 8%? Leverage is the opening answer. You put $120,000 down, but appreciation applies to the entire $600,000 property. A 3% increase creates $18,000 of gross value in 1 year. Measured against the down payment, that resembles a 15% gain before any costs. The same amplifier works backward. A 3% decline erases $18,000 of value. That is also 15% of the down payment. And selling costs do not become sympathetic because the market moved against you. Leverage is not free return. It is borrowed exposure. The portfolio begins with only $132,000 invested because it is not borrowing $480,000 to buy stocks. That makes the comparison look unfair until you remember what the mortgage costs. During the opening year, the buyer pays more than $31,000 of interest and reduces the loan balance by only about $5,400. After 15 years, the buyer has paid down approximately $132,000 of principal. That is real equity. But the same mortgage payments have also delivered more than $414,000 of interest to the lender. Amortization builds wealth slowly at the beginning because interest receives most of the payment. This is why calling the entire mortgage payment an investment makes the house look better than it is. Principal creates equity. Interest purchases financing. Property tax funds local government. Insurance transfers certain risks. Maintenance keeps the asset from deteriorating. Those dollars do different jobs, and only one portion directly lowers the debt. Calling principal a cost creates the opposite mistake. That treats money moved from your checking account into home equity as though it vanished. The spreadsheet separates principal from genuine consumption because otherwise the answer is decided by accounting language rather than economics. Shelter adds the element that neither account statement displays cleanly. You need somewhere to live under both paths. The renter buys shelter with rent. The owner buys shelter through financing and operating costs, while also owning the asset. Comparing a house with stocks while assigning zero value to the housing it provides is like evaluating a bond after deleting the interest payments. Long-run research makes this distinction important. The study called the rate of return on everything examined housing, equities, bonds, and bills across 16 advanced economies from 1870 through 2015. It found that aggregate housing and equity returns look surprisingly similar over long periods. That does not mean your primary residence should automatically match the stock market. Housing's total return in that kind of research includes rental income. A homeowner occupying the property receives that return as shelter rather than a rent check. More recent research on United States housing has also found that rental returns were historically more important than capital gains across cities. Your avoided rent is therefore part of the house case, but it can be counted only once. In our spreadsheet, it appears through the comparison with $3,200 of rent. Adding an extra line called rent saved would double count the same shelter value and manufacture a victory. If you want more housing decisions with both sides forced onto the same spreadsheet, subscribe to Lazy Investor. Transaction friction explains why time matters almost as much as appreciation. Keep the original assumptions, but raise home appreciation to 4.5%. At 5 years, the homeowner leaves with roughly $254,000 after the sale and mortgage. The stock path has about $266,000. The house is still behind. At 6 years, the gap narrows to around $5,000. At 7 years, the house moves ahead by approximately $3,000. Under that assumption set, 7 years is the break-even holding period. The house did not suddenly become a superior asset during year 7. Appreciation and amortization finally became large enough to absorb the costs sitting at the entrance and exit. Selling earlier forces a short stretch of growth to carry expenses designed for a much longer ownership period. That explains why a house can be a good 15-year decision and a bad 5-year decision at the same purchase price. Your expected hold is not a soft lifestyle footnote. It changes the annual appreciation the property must produce before the economics work. A transfer for work, a health change, divorce, a new caregiving responsibility, or discovering that the floor plan no longer fits can shorten the hold without asking the spreadsheet for permission. Housing risk includes the possibility that your life needs liquidity while the property still needs time. Stocks have their own timing risk. An 8% assumption does not mean the portfolio delivers 8% every calendar year. A renter forced to withdraw after a market decline can finish far below the smooth line in the model. The difference is that a stock portfolio can be sold in pieces. A primary residence generally leaves in one large transaction while simultaneously creating the need for another place to live. The comparison was never really 4% housing versus 8% stocks. It is a financing contract attached to shelter versus a liquid portfolio attached to rent. Once you view it that way, the mortgage rate becomes one of the most powerful numbers on the page. Lower the mortgage rate from 6.5% to 5%. The payment on $480,000 falls from roughly $3,034 to about $2,577 a month. Under the same 15-year model, the house now needs only about 2.74% annual appreciation to catch the portfolio. Raise the mortgage rate to 8%. The payment becomes about $3,522. The required appreciation jumps to approximately 5.15%. That is a huge change in what you are asking from the property. At a 5% mortgage rate, ordinary appreciation can make the house competitive. At an 8% rate, the house needs a far stronger local market while carrying larger payments along the way. The higher rate causes damage through more than one channel. It increases the buyer's monthly outflow, which gives the renter more money to invest. It also slows principal reduction, leaving a larger loan balance at the sale. After 15 years, the 5% mortgage balance is about $326,000. The 8% balance is roughly $369,000. Rate shopping can feel like theater when every quote arrives with points, credits, fees, and slightly different language. The underlying incentive is still worth understanding. A rate reduction matters only after you compare its payment savings with the upfront price and the expected holding period. A lower number on the loan is not automatically a better transaction. Refinancing can improve the house path later, but it should not be installed in the purchase model as guaranteed rescue. Future rates may not cooperate. Your income or property value may change. Another closing cost may appear. By math that requires a favorable refinance is speculation about two transactions rather than analysis of one. The comparable rent creates an equally large swing. Our $600,000 house rents for $3,200 a month in the baseline. That is an annual price to rent ratio of about 15.6. Put differently, the purchase price equals more than 15 years of initial rent before financing or ownership costs. If the same home would rent for about $3,563, 3% home appreciation becomes enough to reach the 15-year break even. That rent produces a price to annual rent ratio near 14. The property has not improved as an investment. The shelter it replaces has become more expensive. A high comparable rent gives ownership a larger economic yield because you are avoiding a larger payment. Low rent relative to the purchase price gives the renter more room to compound. This is why a city can have strong population growth, expensive homes, and terrible buying math at the same time. If purchase prices rise much faster than rents, new buyers pay more for each dollar of shelter. Past appreciation may look wonderful, while the return available from today's price becomes less attractive. The reverse can happen in an unfashionable market where houses are inexpensive relative to rents. Appreciation may look mediocre, yet the shelter yield and lower financing requirement allow ownership to compete. A house does not need to become social media's favorite zip code to produce acceptable economics. The Federal Housing Finance Agency maintains house price indexes using tens of millions of transactions, with data covering states, metropolitan areas, counties, and hundreds of American cities. That geographic detail matters because you do not buy the national index. You buy one structure in one local labor market, tax jurisdiction, insurance market, and school district. An S&P 500 fund spreads your money across hundreds of businesses. Your house concentrates it in one location and one physical asset. National appreciation is useful context, but it cannot repair a foundation, change local property taxes, or replace a major employer that leaves your area. Maintenance is the input most likely to be softened until a purchase works. 1% of the home's value gives our $600,000 property a $6,000 annual maintenance allowance. That may be generous for a newer condominium, with some costs shifted into an association fee. It may be fantasy for an older detached house with a roof, driveway, sewer line, mature trees, heating equipment, and deferred work from the previous owner. Raise maintenance from 1% to 2% while keeping everything else unchanged. That extra $6,000 in the opening year grows with the property. If the renter invests the avoided expense, it becomes roughly $194,000 after 15 years. The home appreciation required to break even rises from 4.03% to about 5.24%. That one recurring assumption moves the result far more than people expect. Changing sale friction from 4% to 8% shifts the appreciation threshold from roughly 3.88% to 4.18%. The seller's cost matters, but a recurring annual leak compounds against you every year you own the property. Insurance can become another recurring leak. A premium increase is not merely a budget annoyance. It raises the shelter cost without increasing principal or market value. The same applies to an association assessment, property tax increase, or recurring service required by the structure. Improvements need careful treatment. because spending and value are not the same number. A $50,000 renovation may increase the sale price, improve your life, or do some of both. Putting the entire $50,000 into the home value column assumes a buyer later reimburses every dollar. Putting none of it there ignores real improvements. The spreadsheet needs a conservative estimate of resale value added, not a photograph of the receipt. A kitchen chosen because you love it can be completely rational. It belongs partly in the lifestyle account. Trouble begins when a lifestyle expense gets relabeled as guaranteed investment return because admitting that you wanted it feels financially undisciplined. The stock return assumption deserves the same pressure. At a 6% S&P total return, the house needs roughly 2.97% appreciation in our baseline. At a 10% stock return, the home needs around 5.18%. No honest comparison can tell you which market return will appear during your exact 15 years. The useful response is not to choose the forecast that confirms your preference. Run a range. If buying works only when home prices rise 5% and stocks return 6%, the conclusion is fragile. If it survives weaker appreciation and stronger stocks, the margin is real. Taxes can move the line, but they do not create one universal winner. The Internal Revenue Service allows qualifying homeowners to exclude up to $250,000 of gain on a primary residence, or up to $500,000 for many married couples filing jointly. The ownership and use rules generally require the home to have been owned and occupied as a primary residence for at least 2 years during the 5 years before the sale. That exclusion can be a major advantage. A taxable brokerage account may owe tax on dividends along the way and capital gains when investments are sold. A qualifying home gain may escape federal income tax within the exclusion. The portfolio might instead sit in a Roth account, a traditional retirement account, or a mix of taxable and tax-deferred accounts. Each location creates a different after-tax result. The house may exceed the exclusion. Improvements can change its adjusted basis. State taxes can affect both paths. Mortgage interest does not deserve an automatic tax benefit line either. The Internal Revenue Service requires itemizing for the mortgage interest deduction, and limits and qualification rules apply. Your economic benefit is the deduction above what you would have received from the standard deduction, not the full amount of interest multiplied by your tax rate. A tax deduction reduces the cost of an expense. It does not turn the expense into income. Paying $1 of interest to save a fraction of a dollar in tax still leaves you with less money than avoiding the interest, assuming the rest of the transaction stays equal. We can now build the dark version of the spreadsheet, where buying never catches during a useful financial horizon. The house still costs $600,000, and the down payment remains 20%. Purchase costs rise to 3%, so the renter begins with $138,000 invested. The mortgage rate is 8%. Selling friction is 8%. Home appreciation is 2%. Property tax, insurance, and maintenance together begin at 3.3% of the home's value, or $19,800 a year. Comparable rent remains $3,200 a month, and both rent and recurring ownership costs rise by 3% annually. The portfolio earns the same assumed 8% total return. The buyer's initial monthly outflow is roughly $5,172. The renter pays $3,200 and invests the difference. There is no claim here that every buyer actually invests every avoided dollar when renting. The comparison requires it because spending the difference is a behavior choice, not a return produced by the house. After 5 years, the house path has about $153,000 of net equity after a sale. The stock path has roughly $335,000. Transaction costs and slow amortization give the portfolio a lead of more than $180,000. After 10 years, the house reaches around $252,000. The portfolio reaches approximately $607,000. At 15 years, the house produces about $374,000 of net equity. The portfolio is near $985,000. At 20 years, the house has roughly $530,000. The portfolio exceeds $1,500,000. After 30 years, the mortgage is finally gone, and the house is worth around $1 million after selling costs. The portfolio is roughly $3,336,000. Under those assumptions, the house does not catch the S&P at 5, 10, 15, 20, or 30 years. For someone in late career or approaching retirement, that is the practical meaning of never. An eventual crossover outside your usable decision window cannot fund the years when you need the money. The failure is not caused by one villainous fee. 2% appreciation is being asked to carry an 8% mortgage, high recurring costs, heavy transaction friction, and a large initial gap between rent and ownership. Leverage amplifies an asset that is growing too slowly to compensate for the financing and operating burden. A short holding period makes the outcome more severe because the buyer encounters both sets of transaction costs before much principal disappears. A long hold cannot repair every bad purchase. However, time helps only when the underlying economics are capable of compounding in your favor. That dark zone also shows why waiting can be rational without predicting a crash. You may rent because the price-to-rent ratio is poor, the mortgage rate requires heroic appreciation, or your likely hold is short. None of those beliefs requires home prices to fall. Renting can win while the house becomes more expensive. Buying can also be rational without claiming that real estate is the superior asset class. You may have a long hold, affordable fixed financing, high comparable rent, manageable maintenance, and a property price that does not consume the liquid side of your balance sheet. The house can win through a combination of acceptable appreciation and valuable shelter. The decision becomes more delicate when the down payment is a large share of your investable assets. A $120,000 down payment means one thing to someone with $800,000 outside the house, and something very different to someone with $140,000 total. Both buyers may receive the same property return. Only one retains enough liquidity to handle a roof, job loss, medical expense, or prolonged market decline without borrowing against the house or selling at an inconvenient time. Home equity is wealth, but it is not spending money until you sell, downsize, or borrow against it. Each route has friction. A portfolio can also decline exactly when you need it, although it can be divided and rebalanced without moving your family. Near retirement, the allocation question can matter more than the break-even return. A house that narrowly beats the S&P may still be a poor choice if it traps most of your net worth in an address and leaves the portfolio too small to support withdrawals. A house that slightly underperforms may still be worthwhile if it stabilizes your housing costs and fits the life you intend to keep. Downsizing changes the utility side as well as the investment side. A larger house may appreciate on a larger base, but it also carries higher tax, insurance, maintenance, furnishing, heating, cooling, and transaction exposure. More square footage is not automatically more wealth if the additional space consumes portfolio contributions for 20 years. Paying off the mortgage creates another trade. The guaranteed return from an extra principal payment is related to the mortgage rate after considering taxes. The competing portfolio return is uncertain. At a high mortgage rate, reducing debt can be attractive. At a low fixed rate, preserving liquidity and investing may have the higher expected value. The emotional value of having no payment is real, but it should not be disguised as a guaranteed market-beating return. Behavior can overturn either spreadsheet. The renter wins only if the down payment and monthly savings remain invested. If that money becomes vehicles, travel, and lifestyle creep, the theoretical portfolio never exists. The homeowner receives forced saving through amortization. That can be valuable for someone who would not voluntarily invest the difference. Yet forced saving is a behavioral advantage, not evidence that the underlying house returned the mortgage payment. You can respect the mechanism without corrupting the accounting. Ownership may also encourage a longer holding period, because moving is difficult and expensive. That inertia can protect you from reacting to market noise. It can also keep you in an unsuitable property because selling feels like admitting a mistake. Friction creates discipline and captivity with the same mechanism. The clean personal threshold starts with a property you could genuinely buy and a rental you would genuinely accept. Comparing a 4-bedroom house with a smaller apartment makes ownership appear to purchase more investment return when part of the extra spending actually purchases more housing. Your expected hold determines how many years can absorb the transaction costs. The mortgage, quote, determines the financing drag and speed of amortization. Local taxes, insurance, association fees, and maintenance determine the annual leak. The down payment creates the portfolio opportunity cost. The sale cost determines how much appreciation survives conversion back into cash. Those inputs produce a required home appreciation rate. You can then compare that rate with a conservative range for the local market, rather than the hottest period in a national chart. If the property needs 5% annual appreciation to work and your comfort range is 2% to 4%, the house belongs in the lifestyle column, unless you renegotiate the price or choose a different property. If the break-even is below 3%, the expected hold is long, and the balance sheet remains liquid after closing, buying has room for imperfect outcomes. You are no longer depending on every favorable assumption arriving together. This is the part housing folklore tends to flatten. Always buy ignores price, financing, and time. Stocks always win ignores leverage, amortization, shelter, and tax treatment. Both slogans remove the variables that decide the answer. You do not need mathematical certainty. You need enough margin that one insurance increase, mediocre market decade, or earlier than planned move does not reverse the decision. A result separated by $4,000 after 15 years is a tie wearing extra decimal places. The useful number is therefore not the highest return your optimistic case can produce. It is the break-even rate the house must achieve, followed by the distance between that requirement and the outcome you can reasonably tolerate. 4.03% worked for our original $600,000 property. 5% financing lowered the line to 2.74%. 8% financing raised it to 5.15%. $3,563 of comparable rent allowed 3% appreciation to work. An extra percentage point of annual maintenance pushed the requirement above 5.2%. Those are not conclusions about all houses. They show which variables have enough force to change your conclusion. The mortgage rate, shelter value, recurring costs, holding period, and alternative return deserve more attention than a confident opinion about whether real estate is good. Subscribe to Lazy Investor if you prefer a break-even number to a housing slogan. The house is either a wealth decision or a lifestyle decision. Pretending it's both is how the math breaks. If buying works after every desired feature is charged to lifestyle and every ownership cost is charged to the house, you have a durable decision. If it works only after the spreadsheet begins forgiving things, the S&P has already won.